one of the things I did at Cobb, my 17-year blog, was I did a lot of Socratic dialogue, and some of it was race man stuff. So I'm going to do that now in this paid part of Substack, where I do video. And today's subject is race man stuff, but it's important, and I'd rather talk about it than write it down, just the way this works. So I want to deal with the Whittier question and the Steve QJ question. And the Whittier question starts where we went down a thread of argument on Twitter that Twitter's incapable of sustaining. There's just no way we could talk about it at length on Twitter. It's the medium is incapable of that. So let's deal with it. And Whittier asserts that there is something to race which has something to do with genetics. And he says it's a heuristic, and that's acceptable. That's understandable. The problem, of course, is twofold. The first is that I am what Dr. Sheena Mason would call a skeptic eliminationist, which is to say that I don't believe in the categories of race. I don't think they're accurate. I don't think they're particularly useful. And secondly, whatever good is going to come of race is not good. So I'm an eliminativist, meaning saying I want to eliminate categories of race. I want to disabuse it like phlogiston. And in that, I expect to do so from a very specific set of scientific observations and experiments that will disprove the use of race for any purpose. As I said, just like phlogiston. Before they discovered what oxygen was and didn't understand it, they called it phlogiston. So my original tweet had something to do with what I said, that's gene theory is an order of magnitude more sophisticated than racial theories. So I'm against all racial theories. And but it is common to say that race has something to do with genetics, that there's a phenotype, and we identify people by race. And it's whether your eyes are brown or your hair is curly or whatever. Doesn't work for Asians if you're not Asian. So there's a website that still exists out there called alllooksame.com, where they have a dozen and a half pictures of Asians from New York City, which they claim are 100% Chinese, Japanese, or Korean, and you are supposed to identify the race of these people. Now, it's not clear if Japanese are a race, or Koreans are a race, or Chinese are a race. They're clearly nationalities, and they clearly have different languages. But they're also clearly related if you go back far enough. But then Asians themselves will also include Thais, also include Vietnamese, also include Asian Indians, Pakistanis, and Uzbeks. So what does it mean to be of the Asian race? It's certainly not precise when you can have, something that's putatively 2 billion people. To split up the world into chunks that size is kind of ridiculous. But anyway, we disagree, I think, around the question of precision, which I'm saying Give me a precise definition of white. Give me a precise definition of black. And if we left it right there, an example that I said was, why should my insurance company want to know my self-reported race? And I say self-reported because that's the way the U.S. Census does it. So the U.S. Census lets you put whatever you want as your race, which means it's about your perception about what race you are. And how is that perception established? That perception is established based on racial discrimination. Is it present in your life? Are you affected by it? How do you perceive the effect of racism on your life? Are you a racial minority? So these are all sociological definitions. And Albert Murray is quick to point out the social science view of racial minorities is one of the things that dominates the way we think about race in America. But still, beneath that is the racialist idea that there are races and they indicate something significant about us, even if that significance is only how we are socially treated. In other words, if you're treated like an Asian, you're an Asian. And you're treated like an Asian because you look like an Asian, plus somebody decides to treat you the way they think Asians should be treated. Okay? All very slippery, all very sloppy, and nothing tied to genetics. So then the second part of the question asks, well, I asked Mr. Whittier, what is the genetic marker that indicates, I want to say Tay-Sachs disease, but I said sickle cell anemia. And so basically I'm saying, as someone who understands that human beings have thousands of attributes, and as a data engineer who can put all of those thousands of attributes into a database with identity, including your COVID status or your inoculation against COVID, all those things that I could put in that to make decisions about you with an AI or an algorithm or a heuristic that is non-human, or even surveyed by humans to say, okay, if you see someone with these three attributes, what race would you say that they're in? That is the kind of precision that I want to talk about, because that is inevitably what's going to happen as long as the fiction of race assumes any social meaning and we distrust human beings to do right by the standards of equality, e pluribus unum. So that's what's going to happen. Sooner or later, somebody's going to program this and say, this is the race. This is the race that you're in, and I can statistically prove, beyond a shadow of a doubt, that you're going to vote Republican. And that is the kind of thing, and this will be self-reinforcing, because Republicans will say, oh yeah, this is the race that's with us. And people will adhere to those things, not because they have any scientific clarity, not because they've been experimentally proven, but only because they're statistically significant in a survey or in a market or in a news cycle or in a political campaign. So there's a difference between those kinds of measures and the actual genetic measures that can be made. So if you're not actually talking about genetics, if you're not actually taking the blood test or a swab sample and counting A's, T's, and G's in DNA, then you're not actually talking about genetics. You're talking about race, which is this fiction, a thick fiction, a good fiction. There's so many myths. There's so many, beyond stereotypes for discriminatory processes. There are so many myths and stories associated with race in America because we sustain it. We like the stories. We like to guess. But most importantly, we like to imbue meaning into these definitions around race. And race is not the only thing that we like to imbue meaning on that has no scientific basis whatsoever. It's just that's what I'm talking about right now with Mr. Whittier. Um, so as I come against him in this very short argument, which will probably not last, my argument is that if you can't decide it, if you can't define race with precise genetic markers that are proven scientifically to have a deterministic part of behavior, then you're really not talking genetics. And the fact of the matter is we don't know. We don't know that much about genetics. We know that there's weird, slippery Lamarckism in genetic expression, so that it's fuzzy in terms of causality. But we're stuck in this loop of correlation and the self-referential vicious cycle that is, well, once I say it's race, then will this race agree that it's race, or will that race deny that it's race? And that leads us to the second with Steve QJ, because everybody's kind of stuck at the meta level of racism, meaning, I think I'll paraphrase that. Does racism exist? Well, some people may say no, but if you ask any black person, they will tell you that racism exists in America. And that is kind of the presumption upon which a great deal stands, and a great deal matters, because we take Black Lives Matters at their word. We take the black man on the street at his word when they say racism still exists and we've got a long way to go. I've been hearing that my entire life. So the question is, philosophically, if you are going to transcend race, which I believe that I have, and I believe is actually fairly simple once you disabuse yourself of the notions included in racial theories, that then you're in a new place where the myths and the stereotypes and the discriminations, you become Neo in the Matrix. Finally, you see the dot streaming down and you know everything that is. And these are rules that can be bent and that can be broken. But you actually don't have to be the one to see those things. You just have to liberate yourself from their moral dangers. Anyway, their moral hazards. Yes, the moral hazards of racial reasoning are that you think you're entitled to determine whether something is racist or not, by dint of your race. In other words, by dint of my lived experience as a black man, I can tell you that this racism exists. And that's something that I did as a youth, but it wasn't necessarily about combating racism so much as it was raising a race. And that is the shared destiny of the talented 10th, of which I am an expatriate. But taking that same level of definition, just to say, black people around me are suffering and cash and crime rules everything around me. When are we going to get to the day where things are better? We have to keep hope alive. And that entire narrative that runs along racial lines, race that is this sociological phenomenon and this mythical framework, doesn't work. It doesn't work, and people are eternally frustrated by it. Interestingly enough, though, you can use your race to motivate you. You can say, I'm in the despised race, and therefore I can see, the underside of life. And seeing the underside of life doesn't liberate me, but it gives me the power of a prophet. And that's what I think folks like Ibram X. Kendi say that, and what's the other guy from the Atlantic? T. Coates. And I think that's part of it. But the question is, how has the definition of race and your inclusion in that definition stopped you from being fully human? And assuming, again, human is also possibly a myth, but it is an ideal that we want to achieve when we are thinking about the deprivations of racial discrimination. They are keeping you from fulfilling your potential. They are keeping you from actualizing what you want. And here, see, this is why I couldn't write this down, because I can only go this way when I'm just talking. But if you're following me, you understand that if you're against racial discrimination and you want to be an eliminativist, or an eliminationist, I forget the good doctor's definitions. Sorry, Sheena Mason. You want to rid this concept philosophically from your system, and so in doing that, you recognize what most people colloquially call freedom, i.e., because of racism, because of this stigma of race, I am bound and I am unfree. So let me get beyond that. And that is what transcending race means, which means you can't drag black pride along with you. You can't drag white pride along with you. You can't be this exceptional race person and then say, I have burst the shackles, because you'll always be talking about shackles were right here. See that? Or if you wear a watch, you know that sometimes the skin under your watch band is not that healthy. And so you keep pointing that. Okay, there's my shackle, it's gone. Oh, but you can see the imprint of that shackle, and that psychologically motivates me. Well, then you're still shackled, because you're talking about the effect of the shackle on your life. To transcend it means I don't worry about that anymore. I don't have to think about it anymore. I am liberated, actually liberated. And that's the problem with racial pride, because you always have to reflect back on your prior condition of servitude. And we can fix that in law, because we can say, here's an amendment to the Constitution. Your prior condition of servitude has nothing to do with how we treat you now. But if you treat yourself as always defined by your prior condition of servitude, then you have still a slavery problem. You still have the mark of it. You bear it. And so that's kind of the point here, is in combination, to summarize. Number one, racial theories and racial reasoning are not accurate. They have nothing to do with genetics. Nobody wants to talk about gene expression when they want to talk about race. They want to talk about things like, and I know because I hang out at Quora, where average people ask average questions. If I don't like to eat tacos, am I racist against Mexicans? Look at my picture. What race would you say that I am? Is it racist if XYZ? Or a particular one that I saw this morning is, if white people become a minority in America, will they like it or not like it? And ultimately, the American question survives around the question of racial minorities. And are you a racial minority? And are you getting your constitutional guarantees obliterated or stifled because of your status as a racial minority? Or what is the direction of the country, and what happens if our racial demographics shift this way or another way? And it's certainly been the question in wartime. If you're Japanese and you say, you probably know somebody who was interned in California. um, during World War II. So, will you think this way because you are a minority? And that's the social question. And I'm just saying the sociological way of dealing with people is not a good way of dealing with people, but 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 it will be done. So that's what I'm trying to get under. That's why I'm trying to disambiguate. I'm trying to express the philosophical moral hazards of using racial definitions, of using racial reasoning, of using racial theories to imbue meaning into social in social life. And there's a philosophical way out of it, which means to transcend race, or to be a skeptic, an extreme skeptic, a cynic. No, you don't have to be a cynic. You have just to be skeptic, just enough to unbalance and give counterexamples when presented with examples. And I like the fact that one theme I've been talking about a long time is blood type. I happen to know the Japanese take blood type a lot more seriously than Americans do. And do Americans not take blood type seriously because it was Dr. Charles Drew of African descent who discovered them? No, he figured out how to create blood plasma, which is, has nothing to do with race. And I think now you can make artificial plasma. You still need fresh human blood for that vampiric process. Excuse me, but we don't have social meaning for blood type, and we certainly have a lot less social meaning than we did in the 70s for astrology and palm reading and that kind of aura stuff. And so I say that this is just as meaningless. Today's color struck, woke, whatever you want to call it, racialization of everything. And the racialization, excuse me, falls along particular political lines as both parties go promo. But I'm drifting afield. Let's wrap this up, shall we? There is no sociological precision in race that has to do with cause and effect in a genetic basis. All right? Done. Period. Finito. Finito la commedia. You do not get any powers of intuition or reasoning or rationality by being in a certain racial group. Everything that we know about race has to do with self-identification, not genetics. All right? I say I'm a black man, I am therefore a black man. If I can say I have one drop of black blood and I can prove it just by my curly hair, that's all I have to say. I am as black as any black can be. And so when you take that and you build it into a worldview and say, because I am black, because I represent the oppression of X hundred years of life in America, I therefore gain this specific wisdom. It's prophecy. It sounds exactly like prophecy. And we don't have time for that. If we're going to keep science alive, forget hope. Let's keep science alive. Let's keep the conjecture, the back and forth, the discussion alive. And unfortunately, I cannot teleport people into my office here and interlocute with them directly and have the Socratic dialogue that I would like to have. And so I have to just spit this out and hope somebody picks it up. So that's all for this Sunday morning. Go Rams.